probably impossible to predict in advance what it's going to be like.
Or what it looks like, or...
Yeah, I think there have been times like this in the past when the human mind had to undergo huge shifts, and a lot of them had to do in ancient Greek philosophy, for example, and some of the foundational notions of Western thought were, for example, the notion of truth. That is, that there are some things that are the case no matter what anybody thinks about it. Was first propounded in 500 B.C. by a philosopher named Parmenides, and then Plato, 100+ years later, came along and drew the distinction between truth and falsehood, and wedded the pursuit of truth to the literal domain of language. And when he did that, he effectively laid down the distinction between figures of speech and literal language, which of course we learn when we're in grammar school and high school. So it seems to us that that's part of just how things are. But actually that didn't come around till Plato, who pointed out the distinction between figures of speech and literal language. And then Aristotle came along and codified logic, and then people had a reasoned methodology for thinking logically. And I think that we are soon going to be into a shift that's a lot like those shifts, like entire shift in the way that people think. And I'm really confident of this,
yes,
as a matter of fact.
Well, we're birthing all these new technologies that can facilitate that. Like, it sounds like what you're talking about is this development of a whole new field of science for near-death and out-of-body experiences, where they'll develop technology. And am I right, or is that...
Well, yes, and I think that soon we'll see that there are parts of our minds that we have shut down. And
have they done any research with that? Like, you talked about certain parts of the brain lighting up after, or somebody has a near-death experience. Is there some way to see if they have different things in their brain operating after having those experiences?
There actually are ways of doing this. It takes quite a while to explain it, but basically there's reliable methodologies now that are just beginning to seep out. I mean, there probably is no more than a few hundred people in the world right now who have gotten this, but yes, there are, and it's remarkably simple, actually. It takes a certain amount of stick-to-itiveness. I mean, you've got to reason your way through a long argument, but when you do that, it turns out to be fairly simple to open up a new section of our rational minds that we didn't know even existed, and that these new principles of reasoning are very apropos to the question of an afterlife. In other words, they give us new methods of investigating lots of different questions, not just life after death, all sorts of questions of science and spirituality. But this is not something I think it'll be, it's not going to be right away. This will be in the next couple of years, I think, is where this is going to gain much more general circulation. But for now, I think, I'm completely confident that very shortly now that the way we investigate questions of life after death will undergo a very dramatic transformation. We'll have whole new ways of looking at this.
And what do you think about this, Jack?
Jump in a little bit. Yeah, if I may jump in here a little bit on that.
Yes.
Way back, Duncan McDougall did the research in which he took TB patients who were dying, and he put them on a very sensitive scale. And he tried to measure what happens at the time, the exact moment of death. And he and a couple of his compatriots would sit there and watch carefully. And he found out, and he determined that there was a loss of 3/4 of an ounce, and that's equal to 21 grams that everyone has heard about. Well, he figured that there must be a way to the body and the matter and energy, and this was his conclusion. Well, now, what do we have? We have functional MRIs that can show that at the time around death, there's this amazing period of lucidity where some of the areas that you would expect in someone who is dying wouldn't light up, but they light up with functional MRI. Dr. Johnny Lerma has been working with this, and Melvin Morris says that he is working on grants so he can also use something like a functional MRI to show what is really happening. So that's the science of it. It's advanced quite a bit with that and PET scanners and all these things. And people are opening up, institutions are opening up to say, well, let's do a little more research. But however, I feel that anyone that can understand and can even experience this shared near-death experience will have to realize that this is the way it does work, and there's absolutely no question about it. And all the research is good, all the academic interest is good, but I think the proof is right there. And I think Dr. Moody has done enough to hit the nail on the head. This is what we needed. This will really help.
Well, I know that in your years of working and doing research as a neurosurgeon, you had quite a number of experiences with people. Did you ever have any shared death experiences yourself, or? You
know, when my mother passed, I was not as fortunate as Dr. Moody when his mother passed. You know, I sat with her, and during the last 3 weeks of her life, she suffered from severe Alzheimer's during her last years. She was almost 99 when she passed. But what happened after 3 weeks of being completely out, sleeping, no oral intake, nothing, she suddenly turned and opened her eyes to look at me. She didn't say a word. I did the talking, and looking in her eyes, I said, Mom, I want to thank you again for everything you've done for us. I said, because of you, we'll be just fine, and you can leave. You can go now. And then it was interesting. She closed her eyes and then went back to sleep. Now, I should have stayed there then, but what I did, I set my clock for 2 hours because I would get up and roll her every 2 hours. She was completely bedridden. And then I had the dream, KG and Raymond, that in a dream I had on a white coat. I'm making rounds at the hospital, and the nurse says, Dr. Turner, can you please take a look at your mother? So I walk over to the bed, and I pull out my pen, and on the bed sheet I write, no oral intake for 3 weeks. Family does not wish to push fluids. And as soon as I signed my name, I woke up. And I went to the next room, and sure enough, she was still warm but not breathing. So I really missed a chance to have that shared near-death experience. But I tell you what, at that time, a couple of years ago, I didn't know about the shared near-death experience. And now that Dr. Moody has brought it to light, and over the years he's collected the cases, I think people are going to be more and more aware of this, and more and more is going to happen because people
it's like the first person who ran that 7-minute mile. Then it was, you know, and so it'll be like it brings it into people's consciousness that this is something they can experience, and so then they'll be open.
Mile, KG. You mean 4-minute mile?
Oh, 4-minute mile. Sorry about that.
Okay.
I was a 7-minute mile. 4-minute mile.
This is going to change, and as Dr. Mooney has probably already mentioned, you know, medicine has changed, and we no longer try to shoo the family and friends out. You know, we'd rather say now, you know, please be there at this time because this is a critical time. So more and more of these will come out, and people will realize, look, there is this spiritual world, there is this persistence of consciousness, and with this and the other things we hope to present in this Beyond a Reasonable Doubt TV series, I think for years people are going to learn more and more about this, and will be more and more kind to each other, and it'll be a world-changing thing. I think you're right on the cusp of that, as Dr. Moody said.
Yes.
Yes, I'd add this moment, or this fact that Jack mentioned about the lucidity of people and the terminal events. This is really an extraordinary thing, and again, it's very common. In other words, this is not much talked about, but any sincere investigator can find as many cases of this as they wish, and it's very common, as Jack described there, that when a person is terminally ill, they may go through periods of literally a couple of weeks or more, and they seem to be completely out of touch, and the family is just sort of sitting around assuming that they're just sitting there waiting for the their family member's heart to stop beating, when all of a sudden the person will rally, and the many listeners who have seen this themselves will agree that it's just extraordinary, that for want of a better term, people in this situation become more alive than alive. It's startling to watch this. And whereas before they were obtunded and apparently comatose, they come out of this and they are very articulate. They tell everybody at the bedside, they give everybody a message, and then they just turn over and die. And this is really extraordinary, that the most lucid I have ever seen some people was at them just before they die. And there used to be a name for this. It was at the time when our ancestors would have the death at home, they were aware of this phenomenon, and they called it Fey, F-E-Y. Now, if you look up in the dictionary, you'll see that that word has a lot of different meanings. But the sort of central meaning of it is that Fey is this very phenomenon that people on the verge of death will become extremely lucid. I mean, one man came years ago, this was 14 years ago, I guess, came, and he was describing this phenomenon with his wife, and he was, she had a long declining illness, and then he was getting ready to go down. He wanted to go down to the local convenience store just for a few minutes, so he walked in, and his wife seemed preternaturally alive, for want of a better term. He said he was amazed, and his thought was that, oh my goodness, she's going to come out of this lengthy illness that she had had. And they had a very deep discussion, one-on-one. And then, as you can imagine, he said, I'm just going to go to the store for a few minutes. And of course, when he came back, she had died. And I wish that I could convey the look on his face that he had as he described this to me. And I remember his exact words. He said that looking back on it, he said that time that he was with her just before he died, he said it was as though she already had one foot on the other side. And this is a phenomenon that is so startling that I think if people haven't experienced it themselves, they'll have it a hard time